want to ask you after church, after class, what it is. Wardell, we're glad to have him with us too. That's a neighbor of Brother Rod. Is there we got other announcements, we'll make those at the beginning of before our worship. Any other announcements anybody needs to make? Dee Dee's sick. She's not able to be with us, so remember her in your prayers as well. That's all I can remember. Anybody know anybody else? We got some that are traveling. Owen and Cadence are here. They're in Jacksonville, Florida. So remember them in your prayers. Also remember all the people in the world, not just in this area, friends, but remember those in foreign countries, especially those that are Christians, Ukraine, India, remember those in the Middle East, the wars that's going on. There's a lot of people that's really suffering at this time. So remember them and just keep them in our prayers as well. Anybody got anything else? All right. Daniel, you lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you bless us with. We pray for those who are out sick. We pray that they may get better soon. Be with those who are traveling. We pray that they may be safe. Pray for Eddie and for Lee as they continue to walk treatments. Pray that those may go well. Be Jason and his upcoming tests and procedures. Pray that those may go well. We pray that everything we do today will be acceptable in your sight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Turn to the book of Ecclesiastes. We're in chapter 5, and we're going to hopefully get through chapter 5. We're not going to spend a lot of time. We're going to hit the high points in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, and we're not going to go into great depth, which we really haven't per se in our study. We talked about worship the last couple of weeks. And there's one more thing I want to talk about as far as worship goes, but I want to wait till next week to do that. So I want to maybe skip verse 1 of chapter 5, and we'll finish up worship next week. And what I'd like to study about next week, we talked about the Lord's Supper, why the Lord's Church partakes of the Lord's Supper every first day of the week. But next week, Lord willing, we're going to talk about instrumental music. Why the Lord's church doesn't use instruments of music. People may ask, they come into the congregation, to the church building, and they say, well, I don't see a piano, I don't see an organ, don't see guitars, drums, band, stuff like that. I don't see none of that. Y'all just too poor to be able to buy stuff like that. Well, that's not it at all. There's a scriptural reason why we don't use instruments of music. So we're going to talk about that next week. And but that's part of chapter 5 and verse 1. So what we're going to do is look at verse 2 through verse 7 this morning. And we're going to, like I say, try to get through most of chapter 5 of the book of Ecclesiastes, okay? What I'd like for someone to do is, do what? Oh, I thought you said. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, someone read verse 2 through verse 7, and then we're going to go back and piece it together. If you look at verses 2 through verse 7 of Ecclesiastes 5, he's talking mainly what we're going to look at is the tongue. And we're also going to look at promises or vows that a person may make, especially toward God. All right? So somebody read, Chad, if you want to, verse 2 through verse 7, and then we'll come back and look at it for just a little bit, okay? Go ahead, Chad.
Do not be rash with your mouth, and let not your heart utter anything hastily before God. For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. For a dream comes through much activity, and a fool's voice is known by his many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. Better not vow than to vow and not pay. Do not let your mouth cause your flesh to sin, nor say before the messenger of God that it was an error. Why should God be angry at your excuse and destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams and many words there is also vanity, but fear God.
Okay, so we're talking about words, okay, speech and things that we say. And if you look in here, he says, therefore let your words be few, in verse 2. When somebody, we had a HOA meeting Friday, and we had probably 15, 20 people there. You know, we got a small community. And there was one guy there, I mean, he talked about, you know, just kind of manipulated not manipulated, but he talked a lot. And and I'm not saying that's true of him, I'm just saying, when people talk a lot, what do you think that, does it indicate anything, or what do you think if somebody just keeps talking and talking and talking and talking? What do you think that?
Shut up.
Do what?
Shut up.
Yeah, well, yeah. But, you know, sometimes maybe people do that. And I'm not judging it, I just said these people do that maybe to impress. They talk and try to show who they are, or maybe they're insecure, who knows the reasons. But, you know, we need to be careful of the words that we say, how much we talk. That's why the Lord gave us what's the old saying?
One mouth and 2 ears.
One mouth and 2 ears. We ought to listen more than we talk. Because if I talk all the time, am I going to ever learn anything? No, I'm not going to learn. So I need to listen. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with talking, but I need to listen, because that's how I learn. I don't learn by talking. I learn by listening. And here I am talking. Anyway. So he says, therefore let your words be few. A fool's voice is known by his many words. Somebody turn to Proverbs 10, verse 19. And I looked at that a while ago. Here I got it. He says, Proverbs 10, if you want to go to it and underline, that's what I did. In the multitude of words, sin is not lacking. In other words, you know, the more Solomon is saying, in a multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. In other words, you ever known anybody that rarely talks? They're very quiet. And when they talk, what are you going to do? I'm going to listen to what they got to say, because when they speak, they usually got something that's important that you want to hear, okay? And that's kind of what Solomon is saying in Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 19. So we need to be careful with the way we talk, and how much we talk, and be careful what we say. And that kind of goes on into verse 4 and 5. He talks about making vows, and that's part of talking. Sometimes when we're talking to people, and we'll just use that first. When I'm talking to people, you know, I'll say things, maybe, you know, I'll make promises that I know I can't keep. But we're not talking about people. We're talking about God. We're talking about God. When I make a promise, and some people may call it a vow, but when I make a promise to God, that's serious business. When I make a promise to people, that's something I need to keep, okay? When we get married, Donna, when you got married, did you not make vows? Did we not make promises to our spouse? You know, this, that, whatever it might be, the ceremony, we make promises to our spouse, and those are to be taken very seriously, as we all know. But when we make promises to God or say, Lord, I'm going to do this, those are things that we need to consider as something very serious, because when I promise vows or make promises to God, He expects me to keep those. Now let's look at two things. When I became a Christian, is that a promise that I made to God? Okay. What is the promise when I became a Christian? And that's a vow, a promise, that I made before God before I was baptized and before when I come up. What did I promise God?
Turn away from sin and to do the things that He wants you to do.
Okay, that's true. Turn away from sin and to do the things that He commands in His Word to do. Okay, what are a few of those?
Faithfulness.
Okay, faithfulness in what respect? Okay, Colossians 3, turn right quick, we're just going to look at this. Look at Colossians 3 and verse number 1. And listen to the seriousness of what Paul says through inspiration as far as a person who has made a promise to God when they become a Christian. Now, before I promise something, let's take it two ways. When I promise something, Donna, when you and Darrell got married, did you make promises to Darrell? Yeah, Darrell, you made promises to her. Well, when those of us that are married, we made promises, and those promises are very serious. But when we make promises to God, God remembers those promises. And God keeps those promises. Some people get married, and I'm not saying anything wrong, I'm not saying anything wrong about this. But there's some people who will date, and I hope you ain't in this, and that's okay if you are. If you dated for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or a month, and then got married, does that work? What's that?
So far.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the thing that I'm trying to get us to see is Jesus talks about this. He says, what person who intends to build a building does not sit first and count what? Count the cost. Or a man going to war, what king does not sit down first and count the cost? When I decide I want to marry somebody, and I'm scripturally eligible to do that, when I make that decision, that's a serious commitment. Is that right? That's very serious. Okay? Not just by the laws of the land, but it's serious when it comes to the laws of God. Because not only are there a man and a woman involved in that circle, God's in that circle. There's 3 people involved in that marriage. There's the man, there's the woman, and there's God. And God says that marriage is to last until death do us part. That's serious business. So I gotta count the cost. I gotta think, man, I've made a lot of promises to that woman. And I don't remember half of them. But she does. You see the point? You got to count the cost when you get married. But how about God? When I get married, do I count the cost? Well, not married. When I become a Christian, do I count the cost? And before I go into that water, and before my sins are washed away, do I realize the commitment that I've made to God? That's a promise. And God takes those promises very seriously when I become a Christian. Takes them very seriously. So when I make a vow or a promise to God. I promise when I get in that water and I'm going to give you my life. This is no longer my life. It's your life. My life is your life. My will is your will. My way, your way is my way. And I get rid of self and God's first. Now listen to what Paul says in Colossians chapter 3. If you be raised with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ is sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth, for you died. You died spiritually. And in other words, you are dead to yourself, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Get verse 4. Somebody read verse 4. Who's got Colossians 3? Somebody read verse 4. And read the first 6 words of that.
When Christ, who is our life,
Okay.
our life
Read.
leaders.
When Christ, and underline this in your Bible if you do, who is our life? Christ is our life. We're not his life, or I'm not his life, he is my life. Christ is my life. I made a promise when I became a Christian. That don't mean I don't make mistakes and I don't fall short. That's not what he's saying. But that means he's first in everything I do. It's great to see Nick. That's Peggy's
Older sister.
younger sister. That's Peggy's sister. Good to see Dee with us this morning. So that's the point. When I make promises to God, and I did when I became a Christian, that's the most serious promise I'll ever make. That's a commitment that I made to him. And I give it to him. I give him everything. I give him my life. He don't take 99.9%. He takes 100%. That's serious business. That's what Solomon says. Flip back to Ecclesiastes. Number 2. That's number 1. Number 2. I've been around for a while, thank the Lord, about 70 years, as y'all know. And in my lifetime, and I want to ask y'all a question, has anybody ever heard anybody make a promise to God who may have been on deathbed or very sick or whatever it might be? You ever heard anybody make a promise to God? Have you ever heard anybody? That's the end of the question. You ever heard anybody do that? Well, I have. I was in a hospital room one time. Not me, but I was visiting somebody. And if I remember correctly, this individual made a promise. If God will allow me to get back, this is very serious. God will allow me to get back to a degree of health and blah, 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 blah. I'll be back in church. Never seen it. There's people who, when they have near-death experiences, I'm not talking about like God comes, I'm talking about they almost died in a car wreck or sickness or whatever it might be, and then all of a sudden they promise, I'm going to come back to God and I'm going to live for him and I'm going to give him my life. I promise that's what I'm going to do. And then when the sickness or the tragedy is ended and they get better, they forget about God. That's serious. That's serious. Because I don't know God's providence, and I'm not saying either way, but God gave that person an opportunity to make their life right. He gave them an opportunity because they could have died. But God, and again, I'm not saying how God's providence works, because I don't know, but they had another opportunity to live their life. And they forfeited that opportunity and they turned their back on God. They made a promise, but they didn't keep that promise. That's sad. And that's scary too. That's scary too. So that's what Solomon is saying here. Be very careful when you make a promise to God. As he says in the text, and you can read it, it's better not to make a promise than to make one and not keep it. Very serious. Okay, here's the difference. It's really the same. If you make a promise and don't keep it, it's the same as never making a promise, because you lie, you're lost anyway. I'd rather not make a promise to somebody, and y'all are probably the same way. I'd rather not make Dina a promise, and so I can't keep it, than to make it and not keep it. You ever promised your kids anything, Rod, and you wasn't able to keep it? Did they get married? Yeah, kids do that today. Grown kids. Yeah, oh, you promised it. But it's serious business, especially when it comes to God. We got to be careful with our tongue, with our mouth, with our promises, and all these things that we put forth. All right, anybody got a thought? All right, let's look. And I want to say this. Let's look at verse 8 and 9. And I want to say this. If you've noticed in the study of the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, because he mentioned it in the very first of the book, he talked about the vanity of life. The vanity of life. And he talked about how short life is and how vain life is. And we're here for just a short time. And then we need to be careful how we use the life that God has given to us. Because it's going to be gone soon. Life is vain. Life is empty unless what? Do what?
Respect God first.
Unless God's in your life. Life is vain. Unless God is in your life completely. Okay? So he's going kind of back over that again in verse number 10. And let's look at verse 8 first. Somebody read verse 8 and 9.
If you see the oppression of the poor and the violent perversion of justice and righteousness and improvidence, do not marvel at the matter. For high officials watches over high officials, and higher officials over them.
More verse 9, bro.
Okay. Moreover, the profit of the land is for all. Even the king is served from the field.
Okay, so he's saying, and he's talked about this before. Y'all remember in other passages he talked about how the rich will oppress the poor. You know, that happens in our country. You know, you got the highfalutin, and then you got the poor people, and sometimes the rich oppress the poor, and we understand all that, and that's basically what he's saying. But there are those in high places who will look over and take care of the poor. But who is the highest authority that takes care of everybody? God. You see, I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are or how we think we are or how important people think they are. They're always under somebody else. Now let me ask you a question, and then we'll go to verse 10. Let me ask you a question. The richest man, what if the king of England, that's the only one I know. Oh, let's do this. What about those in Iran? They're having a war with Israel now. They're under a dictatorship. The Ayatollah. What if all the people in Iran, all of which are under his scrutiny and they're under his control, what if every one of them went to the streets and said, we ain't doing nothing. We ain't doing nothing. We ain't working. We ain't producing nothing. We're not working in your gas plants, your oil plants. We're not doing nothing. What's going to happen here? He'll fall. He'll fall. And He might have all this money, but he ain't gonna be able to work in the gas fields and the oil fields and all that stuff by himself. You see, the point is that every person in this world, no matter how much money you make, is dependent on the other person for their wealth or whatever it might be. That's so true. A person who owns a corporation, a CEO, he can't run it by himself. We're all dependent upon one another, and that's what he's saying here. But we're all, at the greatest extent, dependent on who? God. What if God decided, and people think, well, I'm self-reliant. I got all this money, I got all this food, you know, my cupboard's full, I got everything I need. I got a car, my gas is full, you know, I paid all my bills this month, blah, blah, blah. I'm good to go. I don't need anybody. What if God decided for 2 minutes to cut off all the oxygen on the world? What would happen? You wouldn't be here. Or me either. See the point? How we're dependent on others, but mostly we're dependent upon God, and we're dependent upon Him. Okay? Anybody got a thought? Let's read verse 10 through about verse 17. And this all kind of goes together. So we're not going to read it all. We'll take a verse at a time. And we've been over this a little bit. But Solomon goes over it again. And he's trying to stress the point. And it's something that we need to understand. And we need to learn too. That this life, and understand, and I think, you know, we do, or most of this life without God is futile. Now, it takes some of us longer to understand and to realize that than it does others, and some never learn it. Some never learn until death the futility of life unless God's in your life. They never understand that until death. Then they realize that. But then what? Too late. It's too late then. So listen to what Solomon says in verse number 10. Somebody read verse 10.
He that loveth silver shall never be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This also can.
He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver. But how many people, or maybe even ourselves, if I had all my bills paid for, if I had $100,000 and I had all my bills paid for, I'd be happy. No, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. No, because if you say you are, then you're calling God a liar. People, and let me say this though, people whose life is this world and who seek the pleasures and the goods of this life, and that's all they seek for, they'll never be happy. They'll never be happy. You'll never be satisfied with silver or gold if this world is all you're worried about, because you can never be satisfied. You'll always want more. Is that true? Yes. That's true. You'll always want more. We're going to get into something that's awesome. Well, all of it's awesome in chapter 6. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. But he says, when goods increase, verse 11. Somebody get verse 11.
When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes?
Okay? What do you think he means? When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit has the owners except to see them with their eyes? Let me ask you a question. Let's say, people say, oh, I wish I had all this. I wish I was the CEO of GE. That man makes millions a year. His contract, millions a year. Man, I wish I had that. Do you? Do you really? You know what that man goes through? Probably ulcers and headaches and all the things that he goes through because he realizes if I don't produce, I'm out of here. And it's only going to last for a short time. And that's what Solomon says. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. It's always going to be something that's going to be needed. All the time. Something's going to be needed all the time. The headaches of all these people who have all this money. And then he says, so what profit have the owners except to see them with their eye? You don't own what you have. Now you may think you do, and I may think I do. I may say that's my house, that's my car, that's my whatever. That's mine. I paid for it, I bought it, and it's mine. No,
Can't take it with you when you go.
no, it's not yours.
Don't pay taxes
Do what?
on it. Don't pay taxes on it.
That's right. Let me ask you this. Anybody in here got a car that's paid for? Now, raise your hand if you got a car that's paid for. Let me ask, is that your car, Chad?
For right now?
No, wait a minute. Now think about it. Is that your car? Or is that, do you own that car or is that car borrowed?
It's
It's borrowed. You know why? If you don't pay your taxes, they don't come get it.
No, they don't take the plate, they don't take the car.
Yeah, that's your plate, yeah. But it's gonna rust anyway. If you don't pay your taxes, they don't come get it. You see the point? It's not mine. All I can do is look at it and I can say, that's mine, Lizzie. That's mine for a while until somebody pays it or I don't pay for it or until I die. It's never mine. Never mine. The house that Peggy and I live in, one day, Lori's done promised we're going to give her the house. If it's paid for or whatever, we're going to give you the house. Lori's just sitting back waiting. Oh man, I can't wait. The point, that's not my house. It ain't Peggy's house. It's not Lori's house. It's not Eric's house. For a while. For a short while. And that's the truth. Young men like Daniel and Josh and Chad, maybe I'm not judging or saying. Young people like that don't understand that, do they? They don't understand that. Let me tell you something. You don't understand how things aren't really yours and how short life is until you get older. And you get to the point to where you understand I don't have much left. Much time left. I thought about that yesterday. I don't have much time left. Jason reminded me when I turned 70, he sent me a picture, and it ain't in here, so I'm going to talk about it. He sent me a picture of an hourglass. It flows from the top and goes to the bottom. The top was empty. We indicate, boy, your time's gone. The point is, you don't realize the brevity of life till you get closer to the end of life. You don't realize that. But let me tell you something what will wake people up about realizing that this stuff isn't mine and it's just here for a short time. It doesn't matter. I won't mention people like Brother Lee. Okay, how old are you, Lee? 51. That's young. He's a kid. Chad looks at a kid. He's 51 years old, man. Yeah. You don't realize the brevity of life until you get a sickness. Is that right, Lynn? Have you thought of that?
Well, I thought about it before that too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not saying people don't, but that brings it to light more, doesn't it? When we get an illness or a sickness, it helps us understand I'm just a mortal person. And it happens to young people too. I'm just a mortal person. and I'm here for a short time. Daniel Munyon's son died at 46. That quick of an aneurysm. You never know. And that's what Solomon is saying. Life is brief. Life is short for everybody. And it doesn't matter if you live, we got a customer who's 92 years old. That's nothing compared to eternity. I was talking to him the other day, and he was telling me how, I don't feel this, I don't feel this way, I don't feel good, I don't feel like it used to 3 years ago. I said, Mr. Cotton, that's his name. I said, Mr. Cotton, ain't none of us gonna live forever. I said, we all gonna die. It doesn't matter if you're 92 or 102, you're gonna die, so am I. And the important thing is helping us realize, and I'm not trying to be morbid, but the thing, and me and Pam was kind of talking about that this morning a little bit. We're not gonna be here forever, none of us are. But the thing we need to do is realize, if I live my life as a faithful Christian, and I put God first, and I count the cost, and He is my life, if I realize that, life is great, isn't it, Lizzie? Life's fine. Now, that don't mean we're not going to have problems or difficulties, but that means I realize what life is about. Life's about serving God. That's what Solomon says at the end of this book, when he draws the conclusion. Okay? Listen to what he says in verse 12. Somebody read 12 that hadn't read.
The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep.
If you underline that again, that is an awesome passage. What do you think he means in the first section of that passage? He says, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. What do you think he means? Whether he eats little or much. What do you think that means? First of all, let's define what a laboring man is. What's a laboring man?
Somebody who works hard.
Somebody works hard. Somebody works hard for what they've got, The sleep of a laboring man is sweet. A man works hard all day, comes home, eats supper, watches a little TV, goes to bed, gets up the next day, same thing. Does it all over again. His whole life is that way. You think he has a lot of stress?
You might.
Maybe. But listen, do you think who has more stress? The laboring man that works hard all of his life and he's not a Christian? Or a man who works and labors all of his life, but his faith is in God and not this world? Who do you think sleeps better at night? The second one. The second one. Because the second one realizes, I'm just here for a short time. But not only that, the second one understands fully from Matthew 6:33, if you put me first, I will take care of you. God has promised, if I'm a faithful Christian, no matter what, He will take care of me. If I have not got that established in my mind, I need to get it established. That's called faith. God's promised He's going to take care of me. So the Christian who labors and puts his treasures in heaven instead of on this earth, he don't worry about it. He don't worry about, man, I wish I had this. I wish I had this. I wish I had this. His whole life isn't consumed with money and trying to attain stuff. His whole life revolves around God. That's the point. Okay? Verse 13.
On the biggest part of 12, you missed it on the.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep.
Why?
He is so stressed and so scared that he's gonna lose his treasure where his heart's at, that he can't even rest and sleep because he's trying to hold on to it and to maintain it.
Yep. That's an awesome point. He can't sleep because his whole life revolves around this world in which he lives. This is his God. It's kind of like what Darrell talked about when he was in idolatry. You don't have to have a little graven image sitting in your house. We got a customer. I've talked to him before. Josh knows, he's been there. Mark, Eric knows him. Mark, his name's Mark. I'm gonna tell you his last name. But Mark, they have got idols in their yard. They're Catholic. Okay, they spent $100,000 almost on a area of Mary, and we work around it and clean and stuff like that. And I looked at it, I thought that thing's filthy. You mean that idol can't take a bath? She can't clean her own self? They had they got a big pool and all this big, that stuff's bigger than my house. And they got this woman, this statue of Mary, and they're sweet people, nice people. But she said, here's what I'd like for you and Eric to do. I need you to take the Blessed Mother. Well, my mother's blessed. She ain't here. My Blessed Mother. You know who you're talking about, don't you? Who's the Blessed Mother for the Catholics? Mary. She said, we want you to take the Blessed Mother and stick her over here, and we're going to move the Blessed Mother. Why can't the Blessed Mother move herself? You know, move yourself. And I'm not against Mary. We was cutting trees one time. Big old tree had fallen on the house. I might have told you. But this woman had a statue of Buddha. Okay? Had a statue of Buddha sitting here, and I told the guy, I said, y'all be careful now, make sure you don't hit Buddha. I said, because, you know, take care of Buddha, that woman's already told me. So what happened was, Buddha, somebody cut a limb and it went and rested right on top, just barely touched Buddha's head. I thought, oh man. I said, be careful. Be careful. And somebody was cutting it, and it just barely went boop, hit the house. And they went over there and grabbed the head. I said, don't touch the Buddha's head, don't touch his head. They picked it up and the whole head come off. I told somebody, I said, if that was my God, he'd have moved. He would have moved. The point is, you don't have to have a graven image to be an idolatry. Other things in your life or my life can come before God. That makes it an idolatry. Whether it's my job, my car, my house, my family, my friends, my children. If anything that comes before God is idolatry. And that is severely condemned by Scripture. I don't care what it is. If it's $10, it's severely condemned by what? Anything. It don't matter what it is. Okay? So, get what he says. Somebody read verse 13. We got a minute or two.
There's a sore evil which I have seen under the sun, namely riches kept for the owners thereof to their hurt.
Keep going.
But those riches perish by evil travail, for he begetteth a son, and there is nothing in his hand.
Okay. Riches kept for the owner's behalf. How many people do you know who have had tons of money, and because of a misfortune, because of their own inability to take care of what they have, they lose everything they've got. They lose their God. They lose their God. That's their God. And they lose it. Misfortune. When this hurricane came through in September, it destroyed tons of stuff. People lost a lot of stuff and they had to start all over. They got nothing now. That's their God. Materialism, job, fame, whatever it may be, materialism is their God. And what's he going to do to them? Let me ask you a question. This guy I was telling you about, multi-millionaire guy, nice guy, him and his wife. what if? And he's about my age, a little younger. What's going to happen to him if he gets cancer and it's incurable?
Going to die.
What good is all that money going to do for him? I want you to think about that. His whole life is spent, I'm not saying it, but your whole life is spent on that being your God, your idol. That's your God. Now you've got incurable cancer. You've got 2 weeks to live. What's your God going to do for you now?
You're gonna have a really nice funeral.
Yeah. And then they're going to bury you in dirt, and all of it's going to what? Decay. What is your, that's a question I need to ask myself, and you need to ask yourself. If I'm a materialistic minded person and my God is this world, what is my God going to do for me when I die? What's he going to do for me when I die? If it's this world, he ain't going to do nothing, because you know why? He's going to perish too. This world's going to perish too. And it ain't going to be here. That's why we need to lay up treasures in heaven. Because, and I think about this. Lizzie, I bet you Lizzie, well, she's a pretty lady now. But, Steph, I bet your mom was a pretty woman, wasn't she? Where's Lizzie? She is I guarantee she, and I'm not saying she's pretty now, but not pretty now. Peg, I look at Peggy, and I told you this, she's got a beautiful picture of her when we got married, which is 19, beautiful picture, and I told you before, but she don't look like that anymore. No, we don't look, we get older and stuff, she don't look like that anymore. Why? Because
She still look good.
yeah, oh, listen, I'm not saying she don't do. But the point I'm making is that this life fades. And it's hard, and you try your best to help people that aren't Christians or that need to be restored. You try your best in your own feeble way to help people see and understand you're not going to be here forever. And God's got to be first. And the materialistic things of this life don't amount to a hill of gold. They really don't. When all is said and done, they don't amount to nothing. So next week, Lord willing, we'll get into the same thought in about verse 15, okay? Read verse 15 through the end of the chapter, and then read chapter 6. That's an awesome chapter as well. Just ma'am.
You said last week about how people in some countries come
Just get it in and that's what we'll take it out. Yeah, just put it.
Yeah, we can't complain though.